Military discipline gave me a new life, one of order and honor, but in the shadows of my past, I was the victim of a ruthless abuser, my stepfather. Now, he's back, threatening to destroy everything I've built unless I pay him. He thinks I'm still the same scared little girl, but he's wrong. When your greatest enemy goes by the name of family, can justice truly prevail? I am Captain Anya Sharma of the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. My job is to analyze, argue, and apply the law. Everything in my life has its order. Legal files aligned on my desk, my uniform impeccably pressed in the closet, and my Glock 19 cleaned and secured in its lockbox. Discipline is the bedrock of the Army, and it's also what saved my life. But before there was order, my life was chaos, and that chaos had a name: Frank Miller, my stepfather. He came into my life when I was 10, with a greasy smile and the smell of cheap cologne. My mother, Susan, was completely smitten. For the first few months, he played the part of a perfect stepfather. He bought me ice cream, praised my drawings, and called me his little princess. I almost believed it. But the mask fell off faster than I could have imagined. Our house in Scranton quickly became his personal boot camp, and I was the only soldier. While his son Leo lounged on the couch watching TV, leaving muddy sneaker prints on the table I had just cleaned, I was scrubbing toilets, waxing floors until they gleamed, and washing mountains of dishes. The money, too. I remember every dollar my grandparents gave me, Frank took. He'd stuff the bills into his pocket, casually saying, "Here, let your dad hold on to that. It's for the family's future." His voice was sickly sweet. His hand would snatch the money before I could react. I was never part of that family's future. But the worst part was the words. They were like drops of acid on my soul, day after day. "A burden," he'd mutter as I walked by. "Useless," he'd say while I was on my knees scrubbing the floor. He drilled into my head the idea that my existence was a mistake, that I would never amount to anything. And my mother? Where was she in all of this? She was right there. She saw the faint bruises on my arms when I wore short sleeves. She heard the things Frank said, but she chose not to see, not to hear. Once, I gathered the courage to show her a purple bruise on my shoulder. She glanced at it, then turned away, her hands busy rearranging a dish towel on the counter. "Your father is just strict because he wants what's best for you," she said, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "Don't make him angry." My mother's silence hurt more than Frank's fists. It confirmed what he said was true. I wasn't worth protecting. When I was 16, Frank threw my history book against the wall. "You think you're going to college? Don't dream of it. Your place is here, cleaning this house." That was the sentence that lit the fuse. That night, in my cold attic room, I saw a recruitment ad for the West Point Military Academy on an old TV. Images of discipline, honor, and strength. Cadets in uniform, standing tall, their eyes steady. It was everything I didn't have. It was everything I craved. It was no longer an option. It was an escape plan. I started studying like a maniac, hiding test prep books under my mattress. I trained physically every morning before the house woke up, running through the misty Scranton streets until my lungs burned. Frank and Leo were still asleep in their warm beds. They thought I was weak. They thought I would be trapped forever. They were wrong. For me, back then, the Army wasn't about patriotism. It was about liberation. And I would execute my plan with the precision of a military campaign. I got into West Point. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't cheer. I just folded the letter, tucked it deep into my pocket, and went straight to the bathroom, flushing the toilet to drown out the sound of my choked sobs. It was the cry of a prisoner who had just learned her release date. Frank scoffed at the news. "You? An officer? They'll break you in the first week." My mother fretted weakly. "A girl in the military. It's so hard." She didn't understand. For me, the hardship of West Point was a gift. I walked through the gates of West Point with nothing, carrying only the one thing Frank had deemed useless, an unbreakable will. Here, where everything was measured by discipline and results, I was no longer the stepdaughter or the housemaid. I was a cadet, and I excelled. The military's harshness became my sanctuary. Grueling marches, sleepless nights studying tactics, regulations that dictated every inch of my life. It all reforged me. I learned to turn pain into endurance and fear into focus. There, no one cared who you were, only what you could do. For the first time, my worth was measured by my actions, not my suffering. After West Point, I went to law school and joined the JAG Corps. I found my voice in statutes and courtrooms. Logic, evidence, and truth, these were my new weapons. I had spent a childhood in silence. Now I learned to speak, and when I spoke, people listened. My fellow soldiers became my real family. They were the ones who shared dry MREs with me in the desert, who clapped me on the shoulder after a tough trial, who saw strength in me, not a burden. They called me Shark Sharma not because I was vicious, but because once I locked onto a weak argument, I never let go. I cut ties with Scranton almost completely. My mother's calls became infrequent. They always followed the same script. She'd ask a few shallow questions about me, then pivot to stories about Leo's new car or a small business deal Frank had won. Her voice always had a forced pride, as if she were trying to convince herself her life was perfect. I just listened, without judgment or sharing. My life at Fort Bragg was another world. A world they couldn't touch and didn't need to know about. I made captain, handled complex cases, and built a reputation. I had created a new person from the ashes of my past. Anya Sharma, captain, lawyer, a woman in control of her own life. I thought I had buried Frank Miller in that house in Scranton for good. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. The past is never dead. It's just waiting for an opportunity. The day started like any other, orderly and controlled. I had just finished a pre-trial briefing, debating Article 120 of the UCMJ. Everything was in its place. I was in my gray SUV, parked neatly on post, about to head home after a long day. That's when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Frank Miller. A moment's hesitation, then I swiped to answer. I said nothing, just waited. Anya, his voice hissed through the phone, a mix of panic and smug contempt. Long time no see, princess. My silence seemed to unnerve him. He got straight to the point. Listen up, my company's about to go under. A bunch of bastards are suing me. He paused, as if for dramatic effect. You remember that company I started when you were at West Point? Miller and Sons? Well, your name's on it. Your signature is right there on the business loan. The air in the car grew thick. The blood in my veins felt like ice. I remained silent. My training screamed at me to stay calm. He continued, his voice dripping with threat. I need $200,000, wired to my account by the end of the week. If not, I'll let all my creditors and the damn FBI know that the Honorable Captain Anya Sharma is my business partner in a fraud case. Your career will go up in smoke. He had planned it perfectly. He knew my only vulnerability was the very thing I had worked my entire life to build, my honor and my career. Don't do anything stupid, Anya, he snarled before hanging up. You know you owe me. The phone was still in my hand, the screen dark. I sat motionless, staring blankly through the windshield. I didn't feel fear. That emotion had died long ago. Instead, there was a profound coldness, a rage as cold as ice. Less than a minute later, the phone buzzed again. My mother. I knew it was a coordinated attack. Anya, honey. My mother's rehearsed sobs started the moment I answered. Your father. He didn't mean it. He's just desperate. If something happens to him and Leo, I don't think I can survive. She began her usual song about family, about sacrifice, about me being their only hope. This time, I didn't stay silent. I'll handle it, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Oh, thank God. I knew you would. I hung up. I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, breathing deeply, letting that cold rage settle and solidify into one thing, a strategy. Frank had made a fatal mistake. He was no longer bullying a 16-year-old girl in an attic room. He had attacked an officer of the United States Army, on her home turf, and he was about to face a full-scale counteroffensive. I started the car, my hands steady on the wheel. The SUV pulled out of Fort Bragg, heading toward a future Frank Miller could never have imagined. Captain Sharma's campaign for justice had just begun. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the dark, looking out at the distant lights of Fayetteville. In my mind, the situation was analyzed like a tactical problem. Subject, Frank Miller. Subject's objective, extortion. Subject's weapon, my career. My objective, neutralize threat, protect asset, and counterattack to destroy. Panic is a luxury. I had no time for it. My first move wasn't to check my bank account, it was to open my laptop and begin my research. I searched for all public information on Miller and Sons. Local news articles, business filings, complaints on consumer forums. The picture that emerged was clear. A shell company promising high-yield investments that never materialized. His victims were all working-class people from Scranton. Next, I made 2 calls. The first was to Marcus Thorne, a civilian attorney in Philadelphia. We had faced off in a military contract dispute years ago. He was a formidable opponent, sharp and relentless. I respected that. Thorne. His voice came through, clipped as ever. Sharma, I replied. I need your services. Off the books. I laid out the situation briefly, clinically, with facts only. Extortion, forgery, financial fraud. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was hiring a professional. Send me everything you have, Marcus said after a moment of silence. And don't talk to him again. I'll be your point of contact from now on. Not yet, I interjected. I need to speak with him one more time. I need him to send me copies of those documents. Marcus understood immediately. You want him to hand you the evidence against himself. Clever, Sharma. All right, but record the call. The second call was to someone I trusted implicitly, former Recon Sergeant David Chen, who served with me on a tour overseas and now ran a small but highly effective private investigation firm. David, it's Anya, Captain. Long time. What brings the goddess of justice to an old-timer like me? I need you in Scranton. Find me the original file for a business loan under the name Miller and Sons from about 12 years ago, and run a full background on Frank Miller. I want to know what he eats for breakfast. Roger that, David replied, without a hint of hesitation. Report will be on your desk in 48 hours. After hanging up, I sat down and composed an email to Frank. The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound worried but still calculating. Subject, family matter. Frank, I received your message. I can't make a decision without reviewing all the documents. Send me a copy of the loan agreement with my signature and all files related to the lawsuit. I need to know what I'm up against. Anya. I called him, with the recorder on. I got your email, he said, his voice smug. Smart girl. I'll send it over. I need to be sure that's my signature, I said, forcing a tremor into my voice. If it's my signature, I'll figure something out. Oh, it's your signature, all right, Frank chuckled. You signed it yourself, Princess. Don't you remember? He had just indirectly confessed. I hung up and deleted the recording. It wasn't strong enough for court, but it confirmed one thing. Frank was overconfident. He thought I was still that same little girl. He thought he was in control. He didn't know that the pieces were already in motion. And in this game, I was the one calling the shots. For the next 48 hours, I operated like a machine. By day, I was Captain Sharma, handling my duties on post with absolute focus. No one could have guessed the storm raging within me. By night, my apartment became a command center. Frank kept his word. A thick manila envelope arrived by courier. He was foolish enough not to realize he had just sent me the ammunition to use against him. I put on gloves, carefully scanned every page, and sent them directly to Marcus Thorne. The Anya Sharma signature on the loan agreement was an obvious, clumsy forgery. It tried to mimic my handwriting but lacked its decisiveness. Exactly 48 hours later, an email from David Chen arrived. Package delivered. David's report was more than I could have hoped for. It was detailed, cold, and damning. The first page was a scan of a dusty, yellowed document, the original loan application from a local bank that had since been acquired. My eyes locked on the bottom corner. The signature, Anya Sharma, was sloppy and hesitant. a trembling hand trying to mimic the confidence of youth, but instead exposing the deceit of a criminal. Frank wasn't even smart enough to be a good forger. The evidence was irrefutable. I scrolled down. Page by page, David had reconstructed Frank's entire empire of fraud. These weren't just allegations, they were names and numbers. A list of investors appeared, and my stomach tightened. Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who always gave me peppermints. Mrs. Gable, my grandmother's widowed best friend. Frank hadn't hunted far. He had cast his net in the small pond of Scranton, preying on the very people who had trusted him, the people who had watched me grow up. The final pages laid bare the raw financial truth. Frank wasn't a failed businessman. He was the operator of a classic Ponzi scheme, using money from new victims to pay off old ones, maintaining an illusion of success while drowning in debt. The current lawsuit wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable end to a path of crime. He was out of money, out of victims, and out of time. I closed the laptop. The air in the room felt heavy. David's report had confirmed my suspicions, but seeing it in black and white, with names and faces attached, was different. This was no longer just a personal vendetta. This was a crime. David's report was a perfect indictment. But I needed one more thing. I needed the final, most painful piece of the puzzle. I booked a flight to Scranton for Saturday morning, telling no one. I rented a car at the airport and drove straight to the house I had left behind. My mother was stunned when she opened the door. Her expression shifted from surprise to worry, then to a vague, formless fear. "Anya, why are you?" "Frank's not home," she said quickly, as if that were the most important thing. "I'm not here to see him," I said, walking past her into the house. "I'm here to talk to you." We sat in the living room. It was the same, but with a few new, expensive decorations I knew were bought with stolen money. I placed a small digital recorder on the table between us. "I know Frank forged my signature," I said without preamble. My mother's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," I cut her off, my voice steady but heavy. "You knew from the beginning. You were there when he did it, weren't you?" Silence filled the room. I could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock. "He said it was just a formality," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "He said you'd never find out. He said it was the only way for Leo to have a better future, for our family." "Our family?" I repeated, and for the first time a trace of bitterness entered my voice. "This was never my family. You watched him torment me, you watched him exploit me, and you watched him steal my future to build another one on a foundation of lies. You chose your side a long time ago, Mom." "I'm sorry, Anya," she sobbed, her tears coming too late. "I was so scared." "So was I said. "For 16 years I was scared. But I never used my fear as an excuse for cowardice." I stood up and turned off the recorder. "I just needed to hear it from you, so there would be no more illusions." I walked out the door, leaving her there, broken amidst the ruins of the lies she had chosen to live with. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I just felt an emptiness, a definitive end. On the way to the airport, I sent the audio file to Marcus. "We have enough," I texted. "Set up the meeting." The final piece was in place. It was time to show my hand. Marcus Thorne scheduled the meeting for Wednesday afternoon in a neutral law office in Scranton. It was a formal, cold, oak-paneled conference room. I arrived early and sat at the head of the table, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me. On the table was a single, tidy stack of files. Beside me sat Marcus, silent and sharp as a scalpel. Frank, Susan, and Leo walked in 10 minutes later. Frank led the way, chest puffed out, a smug smile plastered on his face. He thought this was my surrender. Leo followed, with his usual swagger. My mother came last, her eyes puffy and avoiding mine. "All right, we're all here," Frank announced, pulling out a chair across from me. "So, what's your solution, Princess? I hope it's quick." I didn't answer. I just nodded at Marcus. Marcus stood up, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good afternoon. I am Marcus Thorne, counsel for Captain Anya Sharma. My client has requested this meeting to present her findings and to make a proposal." Frank's smile vanished. Leo's expression shifted from smugness to confusion. "A lawyer?" Frank growled. "You hired a lawyer against your own family?" "You are not my family," I said, my voice ice cold. "You are a legal matter." Marcus didn't give him a chance to respond. He placed the first document from the stack on the table, sliding it toward Frank. "This is the original loan application for $500,000 from the Scranton Commercial Bank. Forensic experts have concluded with 99.9% certainty that Captain Sharma's signature on this document is a forgery." The color drained from Frank's face. Marcus placed a second file on top of the first. "This is a list of 27 individuals who invested in Miller & Sons with total estimated losses of $3.2 million. We also have statements from 3 of them, prepared to testify that you used the name and reputation of a West Point officer to persuade them to invest." Leo began to squirm in his seat. He glanced at Frank, panic rising in his eyes. "And finally," Marcus said, placing a small digital recorder on the stack of files, "this is a recording of a conversation between my client and Mrs. Susan Miller last Saturday." Marcus pressed play. My mother's voice filled the silent room, trembling and full of guilt. "I knew. He said it was just a formality. I'm sorry, Anya." I looked at my mother. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Marcus stopped the recording. "Under Pennsylvania law, this is evidence that Mrs. Miller had knowledge of a felony but failed to report it, making her an accessory. And under federal law, forging a signature on a bank loan application is a serious criminal offense. Both of you," he looked directly at Frank and Leo, "are facing charges of mail fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft." The room was dead silent, save for my mother's quiet sobs. "You? You entrapped your own mother," Frank hissed, his voice cracking. "I only presented the truth," I replied. "You're the ones who built this trap, years ago." I stood up, looking Frank in the eye for the first time since he entered the room. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a cornered animal. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice sharp and clear. "This is an ultimatum." Marcus let my words hang in the heavy air. He turned to the last page in his file, his voice cold and emotionless, as if he were reading a verdict. "My client offers 2 options. You have 24 hours to decide." He paused, looking directly at Frank. "Option 1. Mr. Frank Miller and his son, Mr. Leo Miller, will present themselves with their counsel at the district attorney's office at 0900 hours tomorrow morning to confess to the full extent of their fraudulent activities. Simultaneously, Mr. Frank Miller will sign a legal affidavit admitting to the forgery and identity theft of Captain Sharma, fully indemnifying her from all liability." Frank opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. "Option 2, he continued, his tone hardening. "If you are not at that office by 0901 hours, this entire file, including the recording involving Mrs. Miller, will be delivered to the FBI field office in Philadelphia and the U.S. Attorney. I trust they will be very interested in a Ponzi scheme involving bank fraud and the identity theft of a military officer." "You wouldn't dare do that to your mother," Frank snarled, clinging to one last emotional thread. "Have you ever known me to make a threat I wouldn't carry out?" I asked calmly. "You made the wrong bet, Frank. You bet on family ties, but you forgot one thing. You destroyed them yourself, a long time ago." The meeting was over. We walked out of the room, leaving the 3 of them in the wreckage they had created. I didn't look back. The next morning, at 9:30, Marcus called me. "They're here, with their lawyer. They chose option 1. I felt no elation, just a clean, empty feeling, as if a tumor had been removed. Frank and Leo faced years in prison and massive restitution payments to their victims. By confessing, they might get a slightly reduced sentence, but their life of fraud was over. My mother wasn't prosecuted. That was my silent part of the deal. But she paid a different price. She lost everything: her husband, her son, her home, and the last shred of respect from the daughter she had abandoned. I never spoke to her again. I returned to Fort Bragg, back to my life of order. But something had changed. The invisible weight I had carried on my shoulders for 20 years was gone. For the first time, I felt truly free. My work continued. Shark Sharma was still sharp in the courtroom, but perhaps with a few less barbs. My comrades noticed the change. They said I seemed lighter. I started doing something I had never allowed myself to do before. I went to therapy. I sat across from a professional and talked about the 10-year-old Anya, about the bruises, about the silence. I learned to heal the wounds I had tried to cover up with a uniform and steel discipline. The family I had chosen, my fellow soldiers in the JAG Corps, were there for me. David Chen called every now and then just to check in. Marcus Thorne sent me a bottle of fine single malt scotch after the case was closed, with a short note, "A brilliant checkmate, Captain." A year later, I was promoted. A new assignment, a new challenge, was waiting for me in Germany. I stood in my nearly empty apartment, preparing for a new chapter in my life. On the table was a handwritten letter with my mother's trembling script. It had arrived a few weeks ago. I had read it once. It was an apology. No manipulation, no excuses, just regret. I picked up the letter, looked at it for a long moment, then placed it in a box with a few old keepsakes. I didn't tear it up, but I wasn't taking it with me. I had forgiven, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Looking out the window toward the rising sun, I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, it was a smile of true, unburdened peace. The war was over, and I had won.